Hi, I'm Ali Words, and this is Last Unrifled Yaw. Last Unrifled Yaw is a podcast where we have conversations about video art, experimental music, avant-garde literature, performance art, and the occult. If you or someone you know would like to be on Last Unrifled Yaw, please get in touch. This time we talk with Tom Whiston, who is a sound artist blending occult techniques with technology and music. We talk about whether or not art is magic, Agile methodologies for working as applied to the occult, and the influence of technology on culture. Hey everyone, I'm Ali Words, and this is Tom Whiston. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, Tom?
Yeah, of course. So I'm a musician mainly. I've been doing music stuff basically my kind of whole life. I think I started playing guitar when I was 6, and from there it's been kind of music all the way through. So all my kind of education is in music. I always made and tried to put out music. And kind of at the same time, I'm also really interested in kind of magic, the occult, and also technology and how all of those things intersect. So those are the kind of three main things that come together and somehow kind of spawn all of my interests.
Could you tell us about one of your projects where those three things do intersect? And I know that there are a lot of them, actually.
Yeah, sure. I think almost everything I do now has that focus. And I think maybe before talking about one of them in particular, or what I did, or what the specific process was, if it's okay with you, maybe it makes sense for me to kind of talk about how I arrived at that point, because maybe it probably makes the whole picture a bit clearer. So like I said, I mean, I started playing guitar when I was really young, and I was quite into kind of technical music back then. So people who could really play guitar well, who were technically really, really good. So I spent a lot of years kind of working on those things, the kind of technical skills of music. And then when I was at school, kind of doing my GCSEs and A levels here, so that's exams when you're kind of 16 is GCSEs, and A levels are like 18ish, just the things before you go to university. And during that time in the music department at my school, I got really into making music with computers. And that really kind of took over my life in a lot of ways. Once I kind of discovered that you could, do everything in a computer, that you had access to all of these sounds, that you could arrange everything how you wanted, that you could really kind of do everything. I got really into making computer music. And almost to the point where for a number of years I basically stopped playing guitar completely. And I became very focused on kind of making things in the computer, being really precise about where everything was. Because when I was younger, I made a lot of kind of breakcore music, and I don't know if you or people listening know particularly what that is, because it's quite a kind of underground genre.
No, did you say break room music?
Breakcore.
Breakcore.
Yeah. So I guess the most famous people who are in that kind of genre, I would say like Venetian Snares is probably the most famous. And then on the fringes of that are kind of people like Occult and stuff like that, that kind of IDM scene as well. And then, there's a really big kind of underground breakcore scene in the UK. So a lot of the kind of illegal parties and things I was into and playing at those, and sometimes helping arrange them and things as well. So I got really into this kind of very highly composed, kind of very high tempo, very high complexity, kind of distorted, noisy, crazy music, which was all made with a computer, kind of really placing every single note. So I had, kind of, we're talking, 200 BPM plus kind of drums where every single note is programmed very, very precisely. And I made music like that for a long time. But the thing that always bothered me with it was there's no live experience in that music. Music that's so highly kind of put together on a computer becomes impossible to do something more with it live in a lot of ways, because the perfect version of that song is the thing that you already programmed insanely precisely when you made it. So you can only really kind of play it worse when you play it more live, I think, in those genres. And that was always a struggle for me, because having come from a playing an instrument background, but really liking composing on a computer, I always said, well, how can I kind of make those two things come together? What can I do to make that live stuff work better, or to do some music which has more of that live element, that kind of improvised, exciting in the moment stuff, which is actually better than what you did recorded, rather than a kind of poorer version. And I just spent years and years really trying to find ways to make that music with more live and more interesting and exciting, mainly for myself, to be honest. But yeah, and it took me a long time to kind of figure that I couldn't do it. And I actually stopped for a couple of years making any music, because I didn't really know what I wanted to do next. I said, well, I don't know how to do this thing that I like making in a way which actually suits me in a live situation. I'm kind of bored of just highly programming everything, because it's it can be very boring and it's very time consuming. And I was never fully satisfied with the results either. So I had to kind of completely overturn my entire musical practice and say, well, what do I want to do? How am I going to do this? What's the kind of future of music for me? And that was a really hard question for me, because I can't imagine myself doing anything really other than music. Music is the thing that's always kind of sustained me throughout my life and been the kind of central focus point of the stuff that I'm doing and I'm interested in. So it was really kind of a difficult time for me then, of saying, what am I doing now? How am I going to change my practice? And I kind of started to realize, well, maybe the problem here is the technological mediation between me and making music. Maybe what I need to get away from here is the way that I've been using the computer and using it as a compositional tool. Maybe I should start looking at other ways that I could have a kind of interaction with technology. And from that, I started thinking, well, what I want to do is get more hands-on with everything again. So I started buying modular synth equipment, and building a small kind of modular for myself, and getting those things and starting to kind of learn how to make music with those tools in a way that worked. And as I did that and I got more into those things, and modular, because there's no presets, the knobs are where they are, the wires are plugged into where they are. And sometimes, even if you turn your modular off and back on again, it won't sound the same as it did before, because maybe something hasn't warmed up yet, or has warmed up differently, or maybe something got knocked a tiny bit before. There's just something about it which is it forces you to be in the moment, and I really found that worked for me, actually. That kind of forcing myself not to kind of be really precise and programmed and into these kind of minute details that, to be honest, nobody gave a damn about except me. Right? You don't hear that stuff when you listen to other people's music. You hear the overall effect. You don't hear the kind of very fine detail on the level of the composer. So I started to kind of work with modulars and playing live. And when I was living in Berlin, I started playing live modular sets, both in kind of club environments, people dancing, but also in kind of more art environments as well, and dance environments. Actually, I did a project which I was kind of sad to stop because I moved to a different country, but I was working with a Buto dancer in Berlin, doing some live shows together, and that was really cool. And I started to kind of really get into that and say, okay, this is the practice that I want. This kind of, it's not really mediated so much by technology. It's very in the moment, and it has this sense of kind of flow to it. And it's much less kind of controllable and more kind of open to, the kind of spirit of the moment, what happens to you as you get absorbed in the sound yourself, and are really listening to what's going on and trying to respond to what you're hearing in a kind of dynamic way. And I mean, I've always been interested in the occult, obviously, as I said. And I think those two ideas actually are really quite close. That kind of idea of being in the moment, in the thing, kind of opening yourself up to these, external or internal influences which come out and shape the thing that's happening around you. There's a kind of ritual element to that. There's a kind of interaction with something beyond yourself with that. So I started thinking, well, actually, doing this practice and really focusing on this practice properly, it is really close to the focus I have in the kind of magical practice that I have as well. And I should bring these two things closer and closer because, as I said, like, music is such a central thing to my life and always has been. And, having this background of these interests as well, that there must be something for me to kind of get out of bringing those two things that I'm so interested in together and seeing how I can kind of make them work in a way which is not just beneficial to the kind of output that I'm creating, but to myself as a person, my own kind of spiritual nourishment, or whatever you want to call it. So over the past, 4, 5 years, something like that, I've really tried to kind of bring these two processes as close as I possibly can and really reflect it all the time in my work. I mean, that has really meant that my work has gone from being something where I really focused on the detail and programmed every tiny thing to something where I really try not to kind of think about what I'm doing and just be here now, right? Be in the moment, feel what's going on. And that's, very close to a kind of meditative state or a kind of ritual mindset or something that, being able to open yourself to those externalities and allow them to express themselves through you, being a conduit rather than a kind of the master of those things where you have to program it all yourself. You're not trying to kind of be God, you're trying to open yourself up to a conduit to the universe or something. So recent projects I've been doing, recently I did a tape called Acts of Devotion, and that's 4 pieces which are kind of selected out of a few months of practice where every day I would kind of meditate and sit in front of the modular and try and kind of make something in the moment and open myself up to those things and just do it and not think about it, and then come back to it later and say, okay, what happened there? What things did that express? Is there something interesting in it? And I thought there was, so I compiled a release and put that out. So that's one recent thing where those two things intersected. As well as that, I would say a really crucial thing to my practice is deep listening, the kind of quantum listening, the Pauline Oliveros ideas. And I think her work is also very kind of aligned with spirituality and ideas like that. And she's kind of very into Tai Chi and Qigong and the Tao. And I find those things resonate through my work as well. And there's something I've made, which is not released yet, but coming soon, which is recordings that I took of things from around my house during lockdown. Kind of when you couldn't get out of the house, I was like, well, what sounds that are just in the house can I use to create these kind of soundscapes that push you out from the normal, that start in the normal world, in a familiar surrounding, but start to push those sounds out into something kind of otherworldly, or kind of give you the experience of either something opening up outwards or maybe something encroaching inwards on the kind of piece of this surrounding ambience. So that's also some work that I have coming soon that thinks about those ideas and how sound can be a kind of conduit for other entities, perhaps.
That's interesting. Now I'm looking at the on your website, tomwhiston.com, there's a page for acts of devotion. And it says that these performances create a space for the numinous by inviting the spirits to ride the performer during the improvisational process.
Yes.
Were there like specific spirits that you experienced?
No, I mean, I wasn't, or none that I would, that I could name within a classic tradition, let's say that. So I wasn't trying to like say, well, today I want to, make contact with this specific thing or channel this thing through me. It was more a kind of general opening of myself. So saying, anything that would like to express itself through me, please do so, rather than saying, oh, I want this specific thing.
Yeah, I approach things the same way a lot of the time. It's interesting. At least when I do it that way, I don't often get what I would describe as the same entity more than once.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Yeah, I think maybe you get perhaps some entities that have some resonance with each other, where you can feel that there's maybe some connection, but there's something different about it as well. Because I feel like those tracks which are on Acts of Devotion all have a similar aesthetic, I think, but I don't feel like they were transmitted in the same way, each one. I think for me, perhaps that whole thing of not trying to, kind of use a pre-established figure from a specific tradition, it probably also has a lot to do with the fact that I'm kind of anti-tradition. In political terms, I would definitely say I'm an anarchist, and philosophical as well, I guess. And I was listening actually to another of the podcast when you were talking to Derek, and he, of course, mentioned that great Blake quote, I must create a system or be enslaved by another man's. And that's a quote that's really important to me as well. But I think that the second half of it is also really important, because that isn't the end of it. It's after that he says, I will not reason and compare. My business is to create. And actually, in a way, that's the crux of the thing. If you don't want to be bound by someone else's system, you need to be willing to work out a system for yourself, to wonder about things, to say, what is this, to question this, to open yourself up to things that are maybe not currently in your understanding even, or comprehension. That you need to kind of make yourself available to these things to somehow form something yourself, rather than be bound by other people's strictures. So I think, and there's always been a kind of strong aspect of that in my character throughout my whole life, I think. So I think that's also really informs my technique, that I don't want to work according to someone else's system. And especially the kind of, dead band's baggage of something like Thelema or something. I can't think of anything less interesting than that for myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And even if you're like philosophically you agree with the core ideas of Thelema of finding your true will, at least in my mind, I'm not in that tradition. It kind of feels to me that if you were really a Thelemite, you'd make your own system, sort of like Crowley was really a Thelemite. He combined a bunch of stuff to make his own system that was at least useful for him, if maybe not right for him.
That's the interesting thing, though, right? Is that there's people seem to want to have a team to be behind in some ways. I feel like sometimes
it's comforting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that maybe that sense of I'm kind of in this tradition, even if in that sense it's a kind of modern tradition. It gives you some feeling of belonging, and I understand people wanting that. But I also think, why is Crowley's opinion on the synthesis of these things more important than someone else's, or better than someone else's? Has it been proven to be that? I would say, based on the kind of hard impact that Thelema has had on anything. No, it isn't, because I think it's still a very kind of fringe thing, and it hasn't achieved very much in the world. I'm sure that will annoy many Thelemites to say that, but that's my feeling on it. But I would say that I am equally skeptical about things like chaos magic. I was really interested in that for a long time, because I like the kind of lack of tradition of it, and the idea that, as long as you kind of do the work, you can achieve something. But I think actually the results focus of chaos magic, even if I know the whole idea is you can't have the lust for result, but nonetheless, chaos magic is results-based magic, right? You judge your success based on the results that you get. That feels like a very capitalist form of magic to me.
I can see that. No, I will say I'm not in the IoT, the Initiates of Thanatos.
Yep.
But some of the current members that I've spoken to or heard on podcasts, they emphasize that you don't have to believe in lust for results, right? If you actually accept what's the basic idea of the core text to Liber Null, then you can choose whether or not you want to believe in lust for results. And then also some people frame the results-based magic not in terms of material results, but in terms of inducing an experience, which is mostly what I do.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, inducing an experience is the interesting thing for me. I was going to join the IoT. I got to the point where I could have gone through the initiation. I did all the preliminary stuff with them. But I found the more I did, the more disillusioned about the whole thing I became. And I think even if, people say, well, we're not necessarily kind of looking for everything to be a result. I kind of found people do. They nonetheless do. There was this kind of thing of, if I do a ritual about this and the smallest thing happens, which is somehow in line with that, then it must be that I'm a great magician. And that kind of didn't sit well with me either, because
that feels kind of maybe not clinically narcissism, but it feels like it's on that spectrum. And of course, everyone is on the spectrum. Everyone has tendencies of narcissism.
Of course, yeah, of course, absolutely. But I mean, I try really hard not to indulge in those things as much as I can.
Especially ritualizing them, because like whatever personality quirks you use to reinforce the idea of your ability to alter your reality tunnel, you're going to heavily reinforce those if you do a good job of noticing those things.
Absolutely.
So you could use chaos magic to make yourself into a supreme narcissist, which
absolutely,
is some people call magicitis, or
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I find somehow none of that really fit for me. And again, that was another thing where after years of kind of being a solo practitioner and being interested in those things, it was a strange experience to kind of go, well, actually, I'm going to try and become less of a solo practitioner and engage more with other people. And in doing that, it completely turned me off the thing. So that was an interesting experience in itself. And I think in the end, I kind of found myself more at home, I would say, within the maybe ideas of kind of traditional witchcraft, the kind of Andrew Chumbley stuff.
Why is that?
I think because he has quite a strong undercurrent of focus on the artist in his work. So I mean, the one thing I always think of is in the Azuetia, there's a ritual of the hand and the eye. And that's, basically you're opening yourself up for automatic drawing, for something to kind of, speak through you in that way. And as you might already be drawing that parallel with the work I was talking about before, that's exactly what I'm trying to do with sound, with my own practice. It is to kind of have this artistically inclined view towards magic, to open myself up to these external things which kind of speak through me in some way, in a way that is a kind of sublimation of your own ego for those other things. If, to what degree that's possible is obviously open to discussion, but to try for those things. And I think there's a strong kind of focus on in Chumbley's work, especially on the kind of idea of the artist engaging with magic. And I know Alan Moore, of course, is also very into that idea. And I know, that's been challenged by a few people. I know probably the most eloquent argument against that is in Duncan Barford's podcast. He had an episode recently of his Occult Experiments in the Home podcast where he talks about how art isn't magic. And although I think he's wrong, it's a very eloquently put and well thought out argument.
Do you remember the gist of the argument? I don't listen to that podcast.
It's been a while since I...
It's okay if you don't remember. I'm just curious because I've heard this before, and I always counteract with were the ancient Egyptians doing magic?
Yeah, I think from what I remember, this is a bit hazy, so maybe you want to edit this bit out in the final.
Apologies to Duncan Barford. This maybe does not represent his exact argument.
Yeah, but I think he comes from quite a kind of Neoplatonist, a kind of Platonic view of what art is, and I know he and I have had discussions about beauty and art, and is that he kind of has that opinion. I think that art is kind of beauty and art are intertwined somehow, and I don't think that that's necessarily true. I don't think art does all art doesn't strive to be beautiful. I know.
So it comes down to how he defines art.
I think so. Yes. Yeah. I think it comes down to the definition of art. And his definition of magic actually. Because he said, I think he uses Alan Chapman's one of Alan Chapman's definitions of magic, that it's about unveiling some kind of truth.
So magic that doesn't unveil a truth by that definition.
Yeah, I am not sure there is a truth. I'm not sure there is a fundamental truth to unveil.
So Alan Chapman, he wrote that Chaos Magic book with the hand grenade on the cover.
Yes, he did. Yes.
It just sounds weird to me for a well-known, old school chaos magician to be talking about fundamental truth or truth in general. Nothing is true, everything is permitted. It's an odd juxtaposition.
I think it's probably fair to say Alan isn't a chaos magician anymore. He has his own, the Magia system, which is really interesting, and again is quite kind of based in kind of Platonic ideas.
I see.
But for me, all kind of everything ends up becoming intertwined with art. So the kind of idea that magic and art are not or can't be kind of intertwined in some way is kind of contrary to my lived experience, which is, I guess, why I kind of push against that. For
sure. I have two responses to that. I say because there are probably more lurking beneath what I'm about to say. So the first is that I normally frame magic as consciousness-altering performance art. Yeah. And I think if you say it like that, you don't have to worry about what model, the energy model, the mental model, the information model of magic that people are talking about. And also people that are entirely skeptical, hardcore materialists. You can say, this is consciousness-altering performance art, and they'll be like, yeah, if you do these things, your mind is going to change. And you don't have to worry about whether or not the results are the results just altered consciousness, or does your altered state of consciousness somehow lead to external change? And then I would also say that I honestly think that we're always doing magic all of the time, because whenever you are looking at the world and thinking about it, you are fitting it into different symbol systems, mostly cultural or linguistic ones, that in turn change the way that you interact with the world and thus the things that you manifest. You're always telling a story about yourself and others.
Absolutely.
So your whole life is like a hyper sigil that you can't help but create.
Absolutely. I think ideas like that are one of the things that actually drew me towards chaos magic in the first place, because I kind of through reading all the kind of early chaos magic books and whatever, I always kind of thought the kind of epitome of the chaos magician is the, open-handed magician who can perform magic anywhere, anytime. You don't need this kind of ceremonial setup and this overblown kind of, I need my seals and my daggers and my robes and my incense and whatever. That magic should be a constant active engagement with the kind of forces at play in the world, that you are able to, not only kind of bend with, but somehow alter the path of at the same time. And I think that's kind of also one of those things which draws me to kind of Taoism and those kind of ideas myself. Though that also, I feel, intersects with my interest in technology, because if you work in the technology sector, you probably have come across Agile methodologies for working.
What are Agile methodologies for working?
So I'll try and keep this short because I don't want to bore you to death with the process of technical teamwork. But
honestly, just to briefly interrupt, I think that's hugely relevant to occult.
Yeah.
That kind of thing in general, especially if you think about your own subconscious mind as consisting of many different personified symbols, people use to talk about demons. So anything that you can say about structures of humanity, either politically or practically, are going to be hugely relevant to occultists.
Sure. I hope so. I mean, I think it's really relevant. It certainly has been in my life and experience. So in software development, the classic approach to project management is always, you have these certain number of tasks to do. You say how long each task takes, and that means that the project takes this long to do. You do one task after the other. You do this task, then you do this one. You hit that milestone. You do these next tasks. You hit the next one, and it's all planned. It's called waterfall planning, right? So it's like each task towards the end is a bit further down the waterfall, and the bottom is the goal, the end of the project. And that's very time-based, very rigid. You go into a project knowing everything should take this long. This whole project should take this long. These milestones should be on these dates. This is the structure of this thing. But technology projects, because they include a hell of a lot of unknowns, much like life, cannot be controlled on a very strict timeline like that. And often it is extremely detrimental to the quality of the end result to force it into a timeline like that. So people in software engineering started asking, well, what might be a better way to deal with these ideas rather than having this kind of strict time-based, waterfall planning? How can we be more reactive? How can we be actually closer to the person we're making something for, so we're not just kind of getting a list of requirements and then 6 months later the thing comes out and it has those things in? And then people started to develop what's more like Agile methodology. And Agile methodology is more like you work in short periods called sprints, normally 2 weeks-ish. You have a certain amount of things that you're going to complete in that time, which you as a team commit to doing, but you don't put time estimation on anything. You only put effort. And every 2 weeks, when you finish this short iteration, you talk to the person who you're developing the thing for. You show them what you've done. They respond to that. You take in those changes, those ideas that they have when they see what work you've been doing, or when they actually try the thing that you've been making. You take their responses and you build that into the next cycle of how you work. So it's not like I give you something and 6 months later you give me back something based on the spec. It's like every 2 weeks we talk about the thing, we get together, we look at it, we discuss whether it actually suits what you need, and we adjust our plan accordingly.
That sounds a lot like the difference between a hermetic ceremonial magician and a someone who's a magical experimenter, if not a chaos magician.
Exactly. You got it. So, yeah, and I mean, there are some rituals to Agile as well. There's, regular kind of meetings and forms of feedback and how you do things. But it's in an experimental, at its best, it's in a kind of playful, collaborative, kind of building something together, very kind of proactive approach to doing things. And personally, I think that approach, if you then kind of zoom out of that from being a software design principle, but you start to think, well, how does that work in the world and my way of how I live? It encourages you to be flexible, to go with the flow of how things happen, to alter your perspective based on the information you get and process and see how things work, and then make a decision based on that and make a change based on that. And I feel that that's quite, in some ways, it's quite close to ideas of like Taoism, that you should, be able to kind of bend in the wind rather than being a rigid, right, and snapping. When if the wind gets too strong and you're very rigid, you snap. Whereas if you're very flexible, you can bend with that wind. So through going through those things through my work and being really interested in those things and doing a lot of research into those methodologies and how they work, that also kind of spread back out to the rest of my life and my kind of spiritual practice as well, and musical practice. And those things all kind of intersect, I think, in an interesting way.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like how you were describing your Acts of Devotion project, where you have like this sprint. It sounded like it was around a month, or how long was it? But you had like this set period of time where you were going to keep working on these different ideas, and then once they're done, you can kind of like pivot to the next stage.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that I guess didn't take from a kind of Agile process in that is like immediate kind of short reflection periods on what I was doing. Because what I didn't, I mean, with Agile, you would look at something you did in the retrospective and say, maybe we could do that better next time. Next time we do a task like that, which could be literally immediately, let's try it like this to see if it's any better. That I don't necessarily want to bring into a musical practice like Acts of Devotion, because then I'm going to focus too much on technique while I'm playing. Like, you can do that outside of that. Technique is one thing you need to know. But I feel like when I'm playing, I need to get out of my own way. I can't think about, where do I want this to go? How am I going to force this to be this thing, this image that I have in my mind? I try actually never to do that now. I try to just let it happen as it happens. So even when I write composed music, and I've got a kind of album of composed music, which is finished in terms of composition, but I can't mix in the place that I live, and there's no studios near here, so I can't get it finished now yet. But even those composed pieces were made in the same way, just not in a single sitting. So I have a kind of idea of what I want to do conceptually for a track, not literally. So I will never start with like a chord sequence or even generally like a melody in mind or something. I will have a conceptual idea of, I would like this album to be about, or I would like this piece to be about. But I try when I sit with an instrument to be a kind of blank slate and let it happen. And sometimes it kind of goes in a way you would expect. And sometimes it goes completely the opposite way that you would expect. And when it goes the opposite way, what you can't do is try to force it into this image that you previously had in your mind. If you then try and take this thing which is going organically in one direction and force it to go kind of through a different channel, it's not going to work. The end result is always unsatisfying to me.
Now, I have a Buto-related response to that. It's kind of interesting. So recently, when I've been doing Buto, I record myself for like maybe 10 minutes. And if you are sincerely doing Buto, you you can't really force the end result of how your body moves, or it wouldn't actually be Buto. It'd be
Yeah.
some other form of modernist dance.
Yeah.
But you could apply the Agile method, and I guess it's kind of what I've been doing to not the end result of how you move and how you look, but the interior path you take in terms of what you're choosing to focus on and think about and feel and visualize.
Mm.
So what I do is like I'll spend 10 minutes and I'll be doing my dancing, right?
Yeah.
With camera in the corner recording me. And I might be focusing more on a certain part of my body or like a certain kind of rhythmic motion, like rolling the
Mm.
shoulders in certain ways and letting it move down into the body, or reverse, like starting with the ankles and moving up to the shoulders,
Yeah.
or like visualizing different things. And then I will immediately stop and I'll watch that and see what it looked like. And instead of trying to move differently, I'll try to like visualize and feel differently and focus on different parts of my body.
Mm. Interesting. Yeah. So you're applying some really directed attention to certain things. And
Yeah.
do you find when you do that other bits of your body kind of subconsciously react in a way that you didn't expect when you watch it back? Or do you feel like you were kind of in control of the whole process somehow?
No, definitely the other parts of the body react. In my in my idealized way of moving, every part of my body is moving independently in its own way, like oscillating. I don't know if you've ever seen videos of people that practice hoodoo, like traditionally
Yes. Yeah.
dance. Yeah, like that kind of like shoulder motion that they do, where they're like almost like their arms are waving out. I'm doing it right now in front of the microphone. Um, that, but like for every part of your body all at the same time. So like your shoulders are doing that, your arms, your wrists, your fingers, your spine, your legs, your facial muscles. Um, and as a practical matter, unless you're incredibly subconsciously good at it, you have to train your subconscious mind. Um, you you tend to focus more on one part of your body doing that, especially if you're like standing, or you may fall
Yeah.
and or like start to fall and then like consciously realize that you're going to fall and then like move your feet to not hurt yourself.
In,
um
in some ways, in the form of it, it's the opposite. But have you read much about Gurdjieff's movements, his dance
I oh,
exercises?
no, I don't know anything about his dance exercises.
It's really interesting because I haven't done them myself. I've watched a lot of stuff about them and read some books and things, but I haven't had the opportunity to study them, sadly. But it seems like every limb has a specific and disconnected movement to do at the same time. So it's very, very difficult coordination of of your different limbs. And it's meant to kind of, I think, get you out of your head a bit in the way of
For
doing that.
sure.
It's still an extremely formalized process of movement, of kind of disconnected movement between, both arms and your legs and your head and things. It's really interesting stuff.
Have you ever played an organ like with pedals also?
Yes.
It's kind of like that. If you got like your left hand going on like one motif and your right hand going on another, and then like maybe your feet are doing different things, you can have all of your limbs going. But if you're playing Bach like that, it's different because it's almost like memorized,
Yes.
discoordinated motion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Disconnected coordination, I should say.
Yeah. When you do Buto, do you do it to silence, or do you have kind of sound that you do it to, or if you do both, do you have a preference? I just wonder.
I do both, and they're very different.
Yeah.
Um, what I lately when I make music, and I don't make that many. There is a period of time before I was writing these occult books where I would make a new like 2-minute experimental track like every maybe like 5 days a week, and I would do the whole thing from recording the sounds to putting it into the computer and then throwing together this track all in a period of like maybe 3 to 5 hours.
Mm.
But now what I do is I probably spend a couple days making the audio, but then I will dance over and over and over to that same music
Yeah.
For months.
Yeah.
And get really in tune with it. And part of why I do that is I have like lots of different meters and polyrhythms over top of each other.
Yep.
And you can tune in. You can get each part of your body feeling a different meter, or
Yep.
at least a different instrument. And especially what I like to do to make it easier to do that is if you have each kind of sound on a different meter, and especially if you have a different percussive sound that starts at the beginning of each phrase that's a different length, even if you couldn't count like 4 different meters at the same time, you can still hear, okay, the kick happens every 5 beats.
Yeah.
This bell sound happens every 7, and then there's this like flute-like sound that starts at every 11.
Mm.
And then you can let your different parts of your body move to each of those. But then when I'm in silence, it's more like either paying attention to the muscular tension and the space that I'm in. There are some Buto artists that they always do it in silence, and it's always them becoming one with their environment. So like they'll find a rock and they'll like merge psychologically with this rock, and they'll flop around on the ground and feel like a rock, or they'll like go to the beach and like flop around in the sand like sand lions. Like they'll learn to like totally disassociate themselves psychologically from human forms of movement.
Yeah, interesting. No, I was just thinking, because when I previously worked with a Buto dancer, we just did everything completely improvised. So I turned up with some modular synth gear, and he came along, and we performed like that, and that was really interesting. The kind of interplay between the music and the dance, then, because kind of neither of you knew where the other one was going, but had to be responsive somehow. So, and for me, it was quite unfamiliar territory because I'm quite orally driven. Again, when I was listening to your discussion with Derek, you were talking about visualizing things in a book. And that was really interesting to me, about like reading passages and visualizing them, because I sound books when I read them. I don't really visualize them. I kind of read it to myself in my head, if that makes sense. So I'm not thinking about the visual of the image. I think about the sound of the words. I mean, a visual arises from that, but the sound is the first thing for me. The sound of me reading it to myself in my head.
Interesting.
So having to kind of work with the dancer where I have to watch and translate that into sound was quite a different thing. I mean, when you work with other musicians, you're also listening, right? So you're hearing how they are sounding their instruments, and you're in a conversation with that. But with that, because you have to watch them, I kind of had to then perform some translation. How do I respond to that properly in sound? How can I make something which is complementary or pushes it in this direction or that direction without being jarring? Or which direction is the dancer trying to push me in with the sound? And that was really interesting for me, because it was a totally different kind of sensory experience for me.
For sure. When I was in college, one thing I used to do is I'd set my keyboard up on my computer desk, and my computer screensaver to this day is still. I had a period of time where I downloaded mass amounts of art off the internet, just like anyone that was posting anything, especially on DeviantArt back in that time, that I liked the look of, or I historically found about like different Salvador Dali paintings or whatever. So there's this massive folder of all these images, and you can set it as your screensaver, but to change very slowly. And what I would do is I would improvise music that went with the flows and the rhythms of each picture, and it would like change every minute or so.
Cool.
So that's an easy way to kind of do that. Or I guess you could like put on a film or like a ballet or something that and just turn off the audio and improvise to it.
Yeah, I mean, film is interesting, I think, because obviously it has the flow of movement is different. I mean, because an image is static, you have to infer the movement of it that you put into sound. Whereas obviously with the moving image, you have it sets a tempo for you automatically. in some ways, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is interesting, but also limiting, I suppose, in some ways, because it's pushing you in a specific direction. But I like doing that stuff as well, and have done bits of sound for various bits of video. That's always an interesting challenge. Again, as I said, because I'm so kind of like auditory oriented. Being forced to work in those visual mediums is always a kind of interesting experience for me.
I wonder what it would be like for you if you had a visual interface to produce sound. Like, I don't know how it would work exactly, but imagine you have like a touch screen, right?
Mm.
And on this touch screen, you can make art, you can paint in different colors or with different brushes and shapes. But the way that you're painting is what produces the sound.
That would definitely be interesting. It's interesting because, I mean, there's a load of amazing technology for like tablets and things now for music making, and I mean, I'm definitely no Luddite. I mean, as I said, I work in tech, and I use a lot of technology in my work, but I find it hard to work with something like a touchscreen which isn't tactile. I mean, it's tactile in a way that it's physical and you touch it, right? But there's no feedback. If you can't turn a knob in the same way you can when it's a physical potentiometer.
For sure, yeah.
And
I have a
somehow,
theremin and it's always like weirdly disconnected.
yeah. I kind of find it's like that with a tablet or something, that the just the finger on the screen isn't the same kind of level of connection with something as grasping something with the muscles of the hand. And I want that tactile experience. And I think part of that is after so many years of making things with a computer and working daily with computers, that I said I just can't like use a trackpad anymore or a touchscreen or something. I need something more. And that was also a kind of major factor in my practice of getting away from the computer and getting physical instruments again, be they synths or whatever. And I mean, getting into modular just to do that is pretty stupid if you value having any money at all. but, but it's been good for my artistic practice, I think. But that's a strange thing. I mean, some people are obviously super at home with doing all of that stuff in the computer and produce absolutely incredible work themselves. But somehow I found it harder and harder to make things which engaged me in that way. And you know what? I want my own work. I want it to engage me in the moment that I'm making it and doing things with it. It can't, it can't feel it can't feel the same as kind of programming or doing my day job or clicking a mouse around in a browser or something. I want something which involves me like 100%, that kind of sucks me into the flow of the piece of work itself. And I don't get that when it's mediated by a computer screen. It doesn't seem to kind of pull me into that sense of flow and that state that you get in your mind where you really are kind of there and listening and feeling part of the experience of that kind of, sound world kind of flowing through you and out of whatever instrument you're playing.
So here's a question for you. If there were a technology that existed that would meet those criteria for you, what would that technology be like?
I don't know. I mean,
what would it have to have or do? And it's okay if you don't have an answer to it. It just seems like an interesting question, like the future of musical technology.
I mean, I'm not sure, because I mean, a lot of modular synth gear is 100% digital behind the knobs and faders, right? I mean, there's so many modular synth components I've got where behind it it's a little teensy board that you can reprogram, or even a Raspberry Pi or whatever. So I mean, the technology is there and involved in that stuff that I'm doing. It's just the interface element. And I mean, how do you improve that? I don't know, because it's already there. I mean, we could use all that super futuristic technology and hook it up to a potentiometer now. And I'm not sure that there's a fully digital version of that which will ever be as satisfying. Like, I can't imagine, even in a kind of 3D, some kind of disgusting Zuckerbergian metaverse nightmare. I can't imagine that even if you feel like you're in a world and it's a synth in front of you, if your hand is on a controller and there's something mediating between the direct hands-on of the controls of that, it still will never be the same. So I don't know if there is a convincing kind of purely flat digital interface that could ever replace kind of the tactile nature of traditional instruments and kind of hands-on something.
Yeah, that makes sense. It might not be possible.
Yeah, I'm not sure it is. I mean, I've got some cool little touchscreen controller things where you can make your own controller with it. Like, say, this area is a slider and this area is a knob, and print out an interface and then control it with your hand. But I mean, have you ever tried using an interface like that if you're not looking at it?
Yeah. you have to get extremely good muscle memory. It's like if you want to learn to play like classical music on a theremin, you gotta, or like if you want to learn to play the trombone, or the violin's a little bit easier because you have like the width of the. Yeah. I mean, it's harder to bow a violin, but knowing where to put all of your fingers is a little bit easier because it kind of stays the same every time.
But the difference, I would say, with that and a digital interface device is that the violin's interface is always the same. Like, you don't have a kind of flat digital interface to something which always works in the same way.
True. I mean, so to connect this to theremin, though, and to give a counterexample of how people learn to play classical theremin music, the theremin, it creates an electric field, right? Yeah. If you have an analog one, which means that if the humidity in the room changes, or even if you just turn it on while it's warming up, the electric field changes size and like reactivity or something. Yeah. I'm not a physicist, but that means that you kind of learn hand positions because your hand stays the same size every time. Yep. So that you know that if you make like an OK sign with your fingers and you pull in your pinky a little bit, that's gonna be like a half step, something like that.
But again,
so your body becomes the instrument, I guess.
Sure. It's still, to some degree, more of a fixed interface, I would say, than a reprogrammable digital device.
Yeah.
So, I mean, because I can understand getting one interface which is digital and learning it incredibly thoroughly. But then why? Because the benefit of digital is the reprogrammability, the ability to completely change what it does, to rewrite what's happening with it. Kind of fixed interface, really kind of touch digital things are always about their reprogrammability. So I don't know why you would opt to choose one of those, only ever stick one interface on it and then try to learn that with your muscle memory. It feels a bit kind of counter to the point.
Yeah, for sure. So what you would need then is, it sounds like you'd almost need a brain-computer interface. Like, it would have to go like strictly from whatever sounds you imagine in your head to just outputting the exact same sound.
Yeah, or even if it wasn't outputting a sound, at least if you could control something in a reliable way in your head, I suppose. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you know, if I think this thing should be louder, it reliably gets loud the amount that I want it to. Or if I think pan to the left, it reliably pans to the left. It doesn't need to necessarily make the sound directly, I don't think.
True, yeah. If technology got that good, we could have both types.
Yeah. That being said, though, no Elon Musk or someone is getting near my brain with a chip. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. I'm laughing because the last episode, which you haven't heard, it ended with someone bringing up Elon Musk, and I was like, let's not talk about Elon Musk. It's so hard to talk about technology without someone bringing him up.
Yeah, or any bastard, really. I mean, unfortunately, the technology space is ruled by a lot of lot of people who I don't think have anybody's best interests other than their own at heart. Sadly. I mean,
Yeah.
that's an interesting thing with technology, though, I think, is it moves so quickly that we are not able to contemplate what it does to us. So I think we live in such a technologically advanced society now that, I mean, on one hand, whatever society we live in, the laws are never as up to date as the technology, right? Technology is always ahead of whatever legislation is around technology, which means it's always a bit of a kind of Wild West. And also, technological advances are now so fast that we don't have a period where something is made. We live with just that thing for a certain amount of time. We're able to assess the kind of benefits or damage that it does to us, and then say maybe we shouldn't have that thing anymore. Like, the solution to all technological problems in the world, as they're presented to us, these solutions, is we need more technology for this problem. Most people don't say maybe we shouldn't actually be using technology to deal with this problem. Maybe the technology is the problem in this certain sense. And again, I mean, I'm not a Luddite. I don't think we should like destroy all technology and go back to the Dark Ages or something. I definitely don't want that. But I think that we need to be able to think about what technology does to us and what it does to our mindsets.
Well, the solution for that is to invent a technology that lets us think faster. That won't have any consequences, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's exactly that's the Silicon Valley answer to that, right? If only we could process that data faster, we could make those judgments. But I mean, and the argument about this has been around for a really, really long time. Because I mean, Heidegger was talking about it, right? In the Question Concerning Technology, that essay he wrote, where he talks about how once everything becomes kind of captured by technology, the world gets kind of caught in this technological view, which is that nothing is kind of good in itself anymore. It's only good for something else. So, I mean, Heidegger's example being a kind of classic German man that he was, is the Rhine. So the Rhine is no longer seen as a kind of river, which is good for the thing it is in itself, this kind of huge river flowing through Germany and irrigating and whatever. But the river starts to be seen as a power source, where when you put dams on it or you put water wheels on it, it becomes good for powering this technology, which in turn is good for making more technology. The forest is not there as a forest. It's there as a potential store of resources that technology can co-opt into something else.
May I interject with something?
Of course, yes.
So it sounds almost like, and I haven't read that essay. I've only read like little bits of Heidegger before getting lost in jargon. But it sounds like the thing that's good in itself steps back from being the object and the thing that it's good for. Meaning, in your example of the Rhine River, technology. The technology is good for developing more technology. It's this process of development, this acceleration, that becomes the good in itself, which is kind of perhaps a characteristic of some forms of capitalism.
Yeah. I would say all.
Yeah, I just didn't want to make that.
Sure. I'm happy to say
I'm not super well read on political theory.
But I mean, even post Heidegger, I mean, Toffler in Future Shock talks about it as well, and there's a book by Stephen Bertman called Hyperculture, which is after that as well, and all of these are kind of 70s, I think, 60s, 70s books, which talk about the pace of technological innovation, and that the pace becomes so fast that it causes these, what Toffler calls future shocks, these kind of disruptions to our society and culture and way of living, which we don't really have a way to comprehend, which become kind of a trauma. And I mean, obviously, Toffler is very much an advocate of kind of slowing down and looking at, kind of slowing down the pace of technology and talking about how it affects us and all of these things. But he was writing that in a time where the pace of change was really a lot slower than it is today. And today, I don't think it's possible to do that. It would be impossible to slow things down in that way because you just can't. I mean, once something has momentum, once the snowball is rolling down the hill, you can't stop it. It's picking up more mass as it goes and getting faster. And yeah, I think now we're kind of at a time where it's really, really going to be difficult to deal with the encroachment of technology in our lives through kind of the technology that I would say kind of not, malign forces such as our governments use as methods of control. I mean,
I kind of just think that the rhetorical turn at this point is, if before the thing that was good in itself was the actual object, the Rhine River, and then in the 60s and 70s, people were saying, my interpretation of what you presented was that the thing that became good in itself was the what the river was good for. So like the acceleration of the river, the river's becoming became the new good, and no longer were the objects of that becoming the subjects of that becoming the good. It seems like the next step is to say that the acceleration of our acceleration, the becoming of our becomings, has to become the new subject of our good. Meaning that we can't stop the snowball, but you can change its acceleration. You can change what the snowball is doing and where it's going, but it's still a snowball going down the side of a mountain.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't think we can it's not like tomorrow AI isn't going to disappear off the face of the earth, right? But what we could do is look very carefully at how we use AI or machine learning, I should say. Let's not say AI. Let's say machine learning. But how we use machine learning for things like predictive policing or hiring people in jobs, pre-screening job candidates. Things like that have incredible amounts of algorithmic bias built in. And because they work according to these algorithms, which are, once machine learning things are trained, it's very hard to see exactly what's going on inside them, right? They become fundamentally kind of black box technology in a lot of ways. I know there are some efforts to make that less of a case, but I don't know, I still think they're pretty much a kind of black box. And we need to say, well, what are we actually doing with this? Are we actually trying to use it to do something better, or are we trying to actually abdicate responsibility for hard human decisions? Because I feel like there's a lot of kind of ideas about using AI to do things as actually a way to abdicate our responsibility for stuff. Well, the unknowable machine in its majesty told us we should go and do this thing. Who is to question the kind of the correctness of this? And I think that leads down quite a dangerous path if it's unchecked.
For sure. Now, this has been a really interesting conversation. I almost don't want to end the conversation right here, but we are getting a little bit on the long side.
Sure.
But yeah, it has been great. Is there anything that you'd like to plug?
No, I mean, go to my website, tomwhiston.com, or if you just want to go straight to the newest music, tomwhiston.bandcamp.com. Everything's on there. Most stuff is fairly cheap, or pay what you like. If you're completely broke, get in touch with me. I'll give it you for free. Check out stuff. Get in touch with me if I spoke about anything that's interesting, because I like chatting about this stuff. So always happy to talk to people.
Yeah, it's been great.
Cool. Thank you.